Welcome back to the show, everyone. Dana and I were getting heated. Boy, this is another episode where we're not starting off laughing.
Yes.
Because our last episode was on gaslighting, and this episode is on companies that make money off of autistics. And so inevitably, Autism Speaks came up because while our audience will not hear this episode in April, which is Autism Awareness and Acceptance Month, Dana and I are taping this episode in April. Yeah. So we're here in this space. But Dana, I was reading this article called Autism Speaks as the largest autism organization, so why don't autistic people like it? Yeah. And so I think, where should I start this, Dana? Okay.
Just read it.
So I'll read it. I'll read this. So I'll read this. This is an article in Artfully Autistic. It's actually a little bit of an older article. It was published on March 14th, 2022 by Tori Morales. And she says, even before I realized I was autistic, I didn't like Autism Speaks. The organization has had a reputation of speaking over autistic people instead of elevating our voices, and I knew I wanted no part in that. Especially a few years ago, their website was exclusively tailored to parents of autistic children, only further alienating people like me. They used to put out advertisements that seemed to demonize autistic people, and it was off-putting. Today, the website looks different. Autism Speaks has made attempts to superficially improve their image. So is Autism Speaks uncanceled? No. I'll make that clear here. Though they may have made attempts to look different, they are still not an organization that you should support. I was inspired to write this article by a recent Twitter hashtag trending in the autistic community, hashtag #AutismSpeaks. It's a good hashtag, but for people not already involved in autism advocacy or disability rights, looking at the Autism Speaks website is not obviously heinous. I would like to explain here why I and most other autistic people urge everyone not to donate to the largest autism organization, right? And she goes into ABA, or Applied Behavior Analysis. And she kind of moves through the article about talking about why the Autism Speaks is negative, is a net negative for the autistic community. You know, Dana and I talk a lot about net positives and net negatives because nothing is all good and all bad. And life is all a net X, right? Right. So she talks about ABA, and you know, we've spoken about ABA kind of quite extensively, I think, on our podcast.
Hasn't been pretty.
It hasn't been pretty. And you know, listen, 20 years ago, I was an ABA therapist. I mean, I became a supervisor. I was the assistant clinic director of an ABA organization. I worked for Lovas, for the Life Company, for Autism Partnership. I mean, this was 20 some years ago where this was the gold standard, and this is what we thought we were doing good. And it really wasn't until I think I started progressing as a psychologist, like in my own training as a psychologist, which inevitably includes play therapy, or it did for me. And then exposing myself to other interventions like floor time or DIR, et cetera. And then really supporting like adolescents, where I was like, because I was only working with young children. Yeah. I was like, whoa, wait a minute. Wait. And then I dumped it. Like I was like, this is not, and I still held some of the really great things that ABA does, which is it can break down a skill into manageable steps and help someone through learning that skill. That's great. That's a great format. But the idea of compliance-based training using reinforcement and punishment,
Mm.
or reducing human behavior to SR, stimulus response,
Yeah.
really became off-putting to me as a psychologist. And it really hasn't been what, Dana, on like maybe the last 5 years, 6 years, where people are
Yeah.
coming out and saying, I was traumatized by my ABA therapy as a child. And I look back with so much shame. And I say this out loud, um, I, because I thought I was doing right by people
And
until,
that's what the predominant discourse was at that time.
yeah,
So the nice thing is that things change and you've evolved with
yeah,
that, right? That
yeah,
you, as you're talking about that, I mean, that for those that don't know historically, the name of the organization, Autism Speaks, like where that was coined from, was that idea of what they would have called mute back then. They would have said mute, or kids that don't talk because they're being stubborn or whatever, and that they would figure out a way to make this autistic kid verbal, right? When really those kids might have just been non-speaking, or there may not been access to how to do that. I think along with your zeitgeist change was also like when iPads and things like that came out, and we started to see people had these rich inner worlds that no one knew
yes,
existed, because now all of a sudden they can, maybe they're not
yes,
speaking with their mouth structures, but they're speaking in other ways. So even the name is sort of like Autism Speaks. We're going to make this happen, and oh, by the way, this can happen. It's also the split along in the community with parents of people that are autistic and adults who are autistic. So now we have adults that are matriculating through this, becoming adults, and they're looking
yeah,
back and saying, wow, this is messed up. Um,
yep,
this mindset of the cure was also what they started out as, that it's this
yes,
pathology, must be something that's happening, vaccines or whatever it is that's happening that's making these people autistic, and we need to cure that. They've even tried to tone down the rhetoric around that, I think, on the website. But that idea of that puzzle piece, was that something's missing, so there's so many things about it that are sort of offensive.
yeah,
And then this is our overreaching thing of it being a for-profit kind of organization that they do, good old America. Autism Speaks isn't in other countries. It's here in the land of capitalism, where this idea of try to put a label on it and get as much money as you can. And you were working as that therapist around a time when a lot of funding, a lot of government funding was going into that, right? Research to that. Because they were saying
insurance-based
there's
funding, like
exactly, and still
that.
insurance will still pay for ABA, right?
Oh, and in many states, it's the
The
only
gold
modality
standard.
of intervention
Yeah.
they'll pay for.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
parents, if they're looking for something different, they really have to be resourced themselves, or they're fighting up a huge barrier that is really not surpassable. So there's all these ideas of what can be wrong with this, are that Autism Speaks personifies, if you will, right? And then there's this whole idea of, as you were talking and reading some of that article, of marginalizing and, oh, poor little dears. These are these kids that have this. This is, so you
Oh my
dropped your
gosh,
drink
Dana.
earlier.
I dropped my drink earlier, and Dana's like, this is why I had to find my cap. Do you need,
So clearly, I didn't have the cap on tight enough because I knocked it over. And
do you,
there it went. It's all right. I got it. It's just a
you got
small
it?
spill. Yeah, I got it. I got it tightened down.
Okay. It sounded big.
As we're talking about Autism Speaks, I think this is apropos. That might
It really
focus.
is. It
So
really
this
is.
idea of these poor, helpless creatures need to be fixed. And then there's also this idea I think we've talked about before about inspiration porn. This
Yeah.
is what drives me nuts. Like I'll see an NFL team, I think it's the Eagles, their heart's in the right place. They have this whole movement to support autistic kids. And of course, it's sponsored by Autism Speaks.
Yeah.
So, where all the money is, where all the power is, you'll see those systems of oppression perpetuate, right? It
I
just happens.
mean, you'll even see like Mark Rober and Jimmy Kimmel
Oh, yeah,
did an Autism
yeah.
Speaks
Oh,
fundraiser too. And Mark has an autistic son.
Oh,
And so like, but this is like so interesting in my mind, you know, and this isn't a slam on those people. We're
yeah,
just saying that when you've got juggernauts behind a
right,
name,
right,
people
right.
don't necessarily question where the money's going.
And
In
when
this
you're a parent,
article,
you're scared. You don't know
and you're desperate. You
where
are
you're gonna end
desperate
up.
for
Yeah,
support.
that's right.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, listen to this. She also says, because she talks about ABA and how it's based in operant conditioning.
Mhm.
Um, but she said it is a method that, according to this paper that she refers to, focuses on reversible behaviors, meaning that operant conditioning, and ABA as a whole, is ill suited to work for autism, which is an irreversible neurotype,
Yeah,
not a reversible behavior.
yeah, yeah. It's all
And
based
that's
on
like
that
a
idea that it's a behavior and it needs to be corrected. Yeah, yeah, yeah,
well, and that, you know, we've spoken a lot about how people judge others' intentions.
yeah, yeah,
And this is one of the things, like, I think the thing that I've seen ABA do, especially for girls and women, is just drive the masking to a
yeah.
whole nother heightened
Oh, yeah,
level,
yeah, yeah.
right? It's like, oh, I got to act right.
This is like
I got
asking
to act
someone
normal.
who's blind or vision impaired,
Yeah.
"You're not trying hard enough."
All right.
Take your glasses off, you're not trying hard enough. You know,
Right.
just squint enough, or that is the analogy. And I think the first time I heard that analogy, before I learned more of the subtleties of this, I was like, wow, that's kind of harsh. And then I'm like, oh my God, it's not a harsh analogy at all. Right.
Yeah, it's real. I mean, when
Mhm.
my clients are like, I don't need that darn accommodation in college, and I'm like,
Yeah.
what happened with your dyslexia? Like, what, did it go away? And they're like, no, but I'm not gonna do it. And I'm like, that's the equivalent of asking a blind person to try harder to see.
Yeah.
You would never ever say
Yeah.
that to, like, would you say that to a or someone who's deaf? Like, you would never say,
Yeah.
if you just tried harder, you could hear. Like,
Yeah.
you'd never say that. And they're like, oh. And I said, why put yourself there? Why,
Yeah.
why, why?
Well, it's
Anyway,
speaking to the
there's,
stigma associated with it still. I mean,
yeah, I
otherwise,
mean,
why would you do that? Yeah.
of
Yeah.
course, of course. And there's lots of stigma to it. And so I understand. I mean, and that's where we can, I've got my trusty magnifying glass. This is so, I've started doing this, Dana. My
Oh, yeah. You're to that age.
For
Yeah.
those of you who are just listening through your ears, I've got this
Yeah.
really beautiful magnifying glass that my godfather actually made. It's so gorgeous.
Oh, nice.
Anyway, but I've started bringing it out because for many of my clients, when we're looking into something, and I say, when the magnifying glass comes out, you're not in trouble. There is no
Yeah.
judgment. There is no punishment. We're
Yeah.
peeking at it. We're taking a deeper look. It's been really helpful. I'm about to get a
Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes hat because, it's me and I like to
Yes.
dress up. But I'm about to do that because it's been really helpful just to say, hey, no, 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 no.
Yeah.
This isn't about fixing. This is about
Yeah.
understanding. And so we're
Yeah.
like trying to do that. So I literally have my magnifying glass here because I'm
That's what I liked
geeky.
about. I know that we've talked about the show, the Atypical on here before, that
Oh,
series
yeah.
that's been on.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I know a lot of
Mhm,
people have
mhm.
strong feelings. There are a lot of things in there that are done terribly and are stereotyped. But there are some things that are done well in that, and that being the main character's best friend that he works with. He's along those same lines. He doesn't see the main character, the autistic character, as autistic, and like that's all he
Mm.
sees. He just relates to him in a way that's like, oh, dude, what about blah, blah, blah? And it really is sort of like just making sense of his behavior and then shaping, if you're talking about like operant conditioning, in a loving way, which is okay, so you don't know how to ask a girl out. Let's do the steps.
Yeah.
Here's how you talk to, he's actually trying to teach him just some tips for it. It isn't like that ABA, like if you don't do this, I'm going to take your phone away, or if you do it, I'm going to literally put some food pellets in your mouth like you're training a pigeon.
Yep.
It's so reductionistic, right? Yeah. I think the thing that's
I
more disturbing about it is we do have evidence now about how harmful it is. There's lots of
yeah.
literature about the complex trauma in these adults, but
Yeah.
it's going to take a while for all this to die off because of how much money and influence and power Autism Speaks has.
Well, yeah, and
Mhm.
that ABA I think because inevitably it's connected, but ABA is a huge moneymaker from an insurance standpoint.
Oh, yeah.
And so we also have a biomedical systemic kind of issue that you and I talk about in regards to diagnostic pieces.
Yeah.
And, a lot of people think that DSM is a psychological manual. It's a psychiatric manual. And that's a medical manual. Let's just be really clear. We use it, that in the ICD-10 or whatever we're on, 11, whatever, 15 to 200. I don't know whatever we're on right now. But, which I kind of like ICD better, but whatever. That's the diagnostic, this manual that's being used, that's funded by medical people. That's not a psychological manual.
It's just a descriptor of stuff, but it does pathologize, right?
It has to.
In terms of this is a statistical guide of psychological and mental disorders. That's what the DSM stands for, right? So
right.
It's just
It's diagnosing based on exclusion or inclusion. And whenever that happens, it's we aren't categorical like that. And we've talked a lot about how women and girls are not represented properly. And the autism under the autism umbrella.
Absolutely.
In there.
If being autistic is a neurological medical thing, which we know it is, it's not any different than looking at like my Ehlers-Danlos syndrome through a medical lens, which it is. I shouldn't ever be a gymnast because I'm too stretchy and I'm going to hurt myself. And there are other things that we do because of that medical issue. My adrenal insufficiency, I have to take a really small dose of steroid every morning because my adrenal glands don't do it. I have a cyst on my pituitary. It's a medical thing, right?
Yeah.
So why do we have this separation with these, whether it's depression or anxiety, all these other things we see in there, right? Really, the funny thing is the only thing in there that in the DSM that has an antecedent described is trauma, is PTSD, because it'll talk about what leads to it. Everything else in there is really descriptors of things that are happening in your brain. Complex trauma is as well. But isn't it funny that the one thing we say that has a cause in it is the one thing that actually does really have a psychological trigger, like exposed to something that's traumatic like that. But then we also look at things like depression and anxiety and say, but it's your fault you're not trying hard enough. Or you need to take this medication, it'll fix it. Or whatever, OCD, whatever else is in the eating disorders, everything. When really it's about that person's brain reacting to the environment that they're not separate from. So whether it's driven by genetics or it's driven by a genetic propensity that gets triggered from, and when I say environment, I mean like experiences can be part of that environment too. How you grow up, et cetera, et cetera. Were you gaslighted, to go off our last episode? All those various things are all factors that go into it. And there isn't that separation between what is biological and what is psychological. We talk about them as two separate entities, and they're really not at all.
No, and that's why we often, as psychologists, we use a biopsychosocial model to think about people. And actually, our old classification system for diagnosis used to be on 5 axes. And that was really interesting. Like that always encouraged me to think about, what are the medical things that might be happening here? What is this general level of functioning here? Like I liked that classification. I understand why we moved to what we were doing now. But that was always like really interesting to me because it really did encourage you to look at the biopsychosocial pieces of someone's diagnosis or diagnoses. And that was, that was interesting. Back to this article on Autism Speaks. She talks about the ads that happened primarily before 2018.
And they have new ones out, by the way. I yell at the TV every time they're on.
Yeah, sorry. We don't do that. We get angry. And she said, before I go into details, I want to mention that Autism Speaks has not apologized for any of these ads.
And you can find these
before
on YouTube if you
on
really
YouTube.
want to
She
traumatize
she
yourself. Yeah, you can find
she
them.
does she shows this commercial, okay? They
Yeah,
use horror movie language to describe
yeah, yeah,
autism.
yeah.
Here we go. Here are the quotes. I'm invisible to you until it's too late. I know where
Mm.
you live. I work faster than
Oh,
pediatric AIDS, cancer, and diabetes combined. If you're happily married, I will make sure your marriage fails.
oh my
I will
God.
fight to take away your hope. I will plot to rob you of your children. You are scared and you should be.
And this is autism speaking, right?
Yeah.
From the viewpoint of autism. It's coming to get you. It's the boogeyman.
Yeah.
Holy crap. I can say crap,
That
right?
you can say crap. I will
Wow.
say I then spotlighting parents who seemingly hate their children. In part of Autism Speaks' documentary, Autism Every Day, they interview Allison Singer, a mother of an autistic child. I'm back to the article, you guys. During the
Mm-mm.
course of the interview with her autistic child, she says the following. I
Oh
had
God.
sat in the car for about 15 minutes and actually contemplated putting Jody in the car and driving off the George Washington Bridge.
Oh God.
It's only because of Lauren, who is neurotypical, the fact that I have another child, that I didn't do it.
Oh my God.
This is with her child, with her in the interview.
Oh God.
She was an executive vice president at Autism Speaks.
Oh God. This is what I do when I can't stand it. I shove my fingers in my eyeballs. For those that can't see it. It's so damaging. It's so awful. I mean, I think we're sort of laughing like in terms of like gallows humor because it's so awful. We don't know what else to.
In
Oh God.
2013, Autism Speaks co-founder Suzanne Wright wrote an article for the Washington Post urging a national plan for autism.
Mm.
Here are some of her quotes. Life is lived moment to moment, in anticipation of the child's next move, in despair. If 3 million children in America one day went missing, what would we do as a country?
Oh
We've, for
wow.
the most part, lost touch with 3 million American children, and as a nation, we've done nothing.
Wow. What's so interesting
It goes
about that is
on
that,
and
yeah,
on.
yeah. It makes the assumption that this thing that we have come up with is the right way to treat it because you were, compliance based. So to the outsider, they look to be improved by neurotypical standards and then not having any idea of the damage that was being done that now we're seeing show up, right? But this whole half of society that's the parents and the medical system and insurance and all that doesn't see what we see. They're all like, no, this has been, this is that evidence base that we've talked about. You can make
Mm-hmm.
anything evidence based. It doesn't mean
Mm-hmm.
that what is happening to afford that behavioral change is a good thing. I could get a puppy and condition that puppy to be scared of me even walking into the room. All I have to do is just beat the
Mm-hmm.
crap out of that dog every time I see it, right? I mean, that's basically what they're doing. They're operationally teaching compliance rather than, um, like you say, assume competence or assume the ability to communicate something, right? One of the things that the DSM did do, and I think did do correctly, because ICD had already done it, they seem to lag behind, is separating intellectual functioning from this. So if you
Mm-hmm.
have someone who happens to have impaired cognitive functioning, that is something that's given as what we call a specifier or add-on. It's a separate standalone thing because before, and I think an awful lot of people still think when people are autistic, they are intellectually or cognitively impaired. And I use those words, I'm trying to be delicate about it in terms of these folks having actual real communication issues that need to be more like what we'd call occupational therapy, right?
Yeah.
Giving these people access to be able to communicate in a way that their brains can communicate, not maybe like us, right? Their vocabulary may be less, maybe they get so
Mm-hmm.
stressed out there. So other ways to communicate. we've been doing that with folks that we label as, or they are actually, can't take care of themselves because they don't know the order for making a scrambled egg at home without burning the house down. And if that's the reality of it for someone, that's the reality of it, right? So you put them in situations that work for them. My wife used to work for the Lighthouse for the Blind years ago, and she'll tell a lot of stories. The whole function of that place was to get folks that were blind or significantly visual impaired to be able to work. So yes, they'd have to take the bus. They couldn't drive, obviously, but they were doing like assembly work,
Mm-hmm.
and they were meeting these folks where they were at. They had this whole process of vetting on what they could do, what they could and couldn't do, and for how many hours could they do it, and so on and so forth. I said, well, how did the people that came feel about it? Did it feel like you were just like plugging them into a factory to make them productive? She's like, no, that was part of the process too, is folks wanted to be able to do this. They wanted to be able to earn that money or have something productive that they were doing for society or whatever else. It wasn't that they just forced them into that. So that's what reminds me of, like, when we have these people will talk about the spectrum and levels of support, or what we used to even more harmfully call high functioning, low functioning, and
Right.
which is really the same thing now. They've just disguised the words with level of support
Level of
needed. But
support.
yeah, it's the same thing, really. Meeting the person where that person is at, right? Again, using the analogy of my EDS, I have the hypermobile type of EDS. I've had the vascular form ruled out. I've had tests for that. There are some really scary forms of EDS that you can die from. Would you tell somebody who's got the vascular form to become a marathoner? No, it's a great way to drive them to their death earlier, or to go through labor if they're pregnant. If you know a woman's got vascular EDS and she's pregnant, she has got to have a C-section, and even then it's very scary.
Yep.
Why do we not meet autistic people where they are at, like that biopsychosocial model, right? Does this person need help with daily tasks? Maybe. Does this person, can they think critically, or do they have the intellectual capacity to do that? Yes, they do. No, they don't. Okay. If they don't, what level are they at and where can we meet them, right? But that all comes down to money as well. It's always about what can we afford to do for these folks. That makes me crazy. Let's just force them into a box and make them a certain way. And, we have evidence now that this is harmful. It's showing up and it's not changing. That's the scariest part. I think that's why you and I are so strongly having this position, talking about it on this podcast, and how we talk about, we really sort of, the fact that we have this podcast and we talk about autism and neurodiversity from an acceptance place, a
Yeah.
celebratory place,
Yeah.
is it goes to our fiber. It's why we do this. It's why we're advocates, right? It's why we do the work we do. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, then it happens little by little. Like,
Yeah.
it happens by having conversations and
Mm-hmm.
building communities and,
Mm-hmm.
um, you know, and paying attention. It's when I was younger and Autism Speaks, we would do these walks.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I just remember early in my career thinking, gosh, we've raised so much money for Autism Speaks, and I haven't met one single person who's benefited from it.
Ooh,
Like
yeah.
I haven't met anyone that's ever received any
Mm-hmm.
kind of, they weren't ever the beneficiary of all the money. And,
Yeah.
and that was really interesting to me. And then one day I decided that I was going to look up, this was a long time ago, that I was going to look up the board members and how much they were paid, because it's a nonprofit. So that's all public information. And at the time, so this was, I don't know, 15 years ago, I guess. Is that an
Mm-hmm.
exaggeration? I don't know. It's a long time ago.
Mm-hmm.
Their CEO of their board was making at the time, so this is over a decade ago for sure, I don't know, 250, 260 thou a year. being CEO
Even
of their
in
board.
nonprofit, good old capitalism at work.
Right.
Yeah.
So that was really, really interesting to me. And then I just really started like, I'm not going to light it up blue. I don't know what this is. I'm not going to
Mhm.
do the blue pumpkin. I'm not going to do, and I'm not autistic, but I
Yeah.
will say that it just rubbed all my autistic adults that I support really wrong. Like they were
Yeah.
like, this is uh, awful. And
Yeah.
I'm not broken and I don't have a piece missing. I don't,
Mhm.
autism
That's that
speaks is
inspiration
primarily,
porn. Ooh, look,
yeah,
we
that's
helped.
inspiration
Yeah.
porn.
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
and it's very parent driven. Autism
Yeah.
speaks is very parent driven. It's,
Yeah.
if you're an autistic adult, you're not going to get a lot of support, I think, from Autism Speaks as
Oh,
an
no.
adult.
No. Yeah.
So that's really interesting. But this idea of like, how do we support organizations? If I think about what organizations I want to support that are facilitating or promoting the neurodiversity movement, one of
Mhm.
the things that I would try to see um, is, are there autistics somewhere? Is the autistic voice somewhere in that organization, right?
Yeah.
Do you have autistics on your board? Do
Right.
you have autistics working for you in the organization?
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
how in the world, like, right? Like
Yep.
that's what I'd be looking at. Where's the
Yeah.
autistic voice in
It's
that
so interesting because really
organization?
the only vocation that has seen this as a good thing and celebratory has been technology.
Yeah.
They have,
Yeah.
active recruiting saying, yes, we know that these folks have hyperfocus and can do these jobs and they understand these things, and let's recruit for that specifically. This is a good thing. We want this, right? That's really the only profession I think that has really done that. Everywhere else, it just still sees it as so stigmatized,
Yeah.
right? I did, and I'll talk about it on another podcast, but I finished the research I did on downloading all the TikTok comments. So I'm presenting a
Oh,
poster at
yeah, yeah.
APA this year. What was
Yeah.
interesting about it is that there were like 13 what we call essential themes qualitatively, and 4 or 5 of them were things that are in the DSM that you'd expect, and the rest weren't. So these were all comments from adult followers on TikTok for Awake, and some of the comments that they would make. It was regardless of what post I had made, because some people would talk in response to the post or other things. And it was really more, the title of it is to promote the lived experience, to lift the voices of actually autistic adult folks. So
Yep.
these are all these things that the machine, if you will, right? Autism Speaks, our field. Do I belong to Division 33, which is the, autism and developmental disorders thing of APA? Yes, I do. And I'm on their listserv. And 99 times out of 100, when I get an email through from them, I just hit delete out. I barely read
Yep.
it because it's so marginalizing even. So,
Yeah.
but they are the ones that are accepted the poster, which is great. So, that sense of starting to see some of that research of going to the source, like you said, do you have people working for your organization that actually have this viewpoint? Why is it important to have this viewpoint? This
Yeah.
is that fight that I had at Antioch when they put out that this was
Oh,
a
the
couple months
screener,
ago,
the
the
assessment
screener, and it
screener
was, but
clinic.
they now invited me to be on the panel, which is great. They're like,
Good.
Judy, we didn't know you existed. We have a faculty member who's an advocate who's out. Will you join us? And I'm like, yes, please. So that's sort of rare, though, I think, for them to understand that we need the voice, because clearly we blew it because we don't have the voice. So
Yeah.
that's the purpose that having the voice serves. And Autism Speaks isn't
Yeah.
about that. It's about tamping it down and conformity and not wanting to hear the source, right?
Yeah. And face your past.
Yeah.
Like, I get it. Like, I really understand that piece, as I look back with my own shame,
Mm,
in, the role I played. It's like, I'm very forthcoming with my own journey as a professional.
Mhm, mhm.
And
It's brought you
and
here,
my,
right?
you know,
Yeah.
right. And my major, I mean, I have a PhD in psych, but my major is in childhood developmental disorders. Like
Mm,
it is,
mhm,
that
mhm,
is
mhm.
that was my focus of my studies. It was
Yeah.
the focus of my thesis and my dissertation, autism specifically was, and but you know, this is in the early 2000s.
Yeah. Oh god, yeah, yeah. The only
You
thing I'd seen in
know,
grad school then was the video of, Temple Grandin. That was the
a Temple
extent of
Grandin,
my
maybe like
exposure.
Rain
Yeah.
Man might have been,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, was like probably coming out. I at the
Mhm.
time in my department, no one else had ever supported or met anyone with autism
Yeah.
at that
Oh,
time.
yeah. Yeah. Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like it
Yeah.
wasn't, you know, the numbers were, I don't know, it was like one
Yeah.
in 10,000, one in 2,000. I don't know. It was like it's not what it is today, you know.
Right. Right. Exactly.
But
Yeah.
but it's so fascinating. But I think, you know, this idea of where's the money going? What
Mm.
are we promoting? And instead of Dana and I complaining about it, because we're not, that's not the purpose of our
Well, we
episode
come on
today.
here trying to educate people about what the real
Yeah,
scoop is. So we're trying to put
we're
an
trying to do
alternative narrative
something.
up there. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we're trying to, and you know, it's for those of you that are on our channels. Like Dana and I don't get paid for this. Like
No.
we're not like viral superstars of, but we both feel really strongly about it at a very core
Yeah.
place. It helps that Dana is really fun to be around, and so
Well, back
um,
at you. Yeah.
you know, but anyway, everyone. So, you know, maybe the idea here is question where your money goes,
Mhm.
question where you put your attention and energies, and
Mhm.
like, you know, let's kind of work together to,
Yeah, even, like my wife doesn't know all the subtleties of autism speaks, but she knows enough to know they're bad. And so she even told me the other
yeah.
day, she's like, someone at work mentioned autism speaks, and she just said, oh, because they know I'm autistic. They're like, oh, autism speaks is not good. And they said, well, what? She said, well, I don't know all the particulars because I'm not tapped into it, but I trust Dana and it's bad. And they were like,
Yeah.
oh. So I was like, oh, cool. So there's one more person now that I've spit in their soup
Yeah.
through my
You spit
wife.
in
Like,
the soup.
"Ooh." Yep.
Right.
So, yeah.
Right. So
So we
maybe,
we did
maybe
that.
if we can give people some highlights or
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
verbal, bullet points, it would be that it remains oppressive
Yeah. They're
to
the Death
autistics.
Star Empire analogy,
Yes.
right?
The analogy, yes. Yes, Dana. It keeps getting rebuilt.
Mhm.
But still meaning to do evil and harm. It's oppressive. It does not inherently accept autistics as normal
Mhm.
variance, as
Mhm.
expected variance in
Mhm.
our
Mhm. Mhm.
world, right?
Yep.
There's a big push on the parental experience versus the autistic
Right.
experience.
Right. Right.
So, you know, those would be some of just maybe some little, if you wanted a few little bullet points to
Yeah, there you
share
go.
with
Yeah.
people. There you go. I'm sure we
Yeah.
could come up with more, but
Sure.
anyway. All right, everyone. Be good to you, and we will catch you in the next episode. Bye.
Bye.